But when leaders say they want their teams to step up, they have no idea what that actually means. And often what they unconsciously mean, in my experience, is I'd like them to step up in the way that I want them to step up and say the things I want them to say and say the things that are going to make me feel good. They tend not to mean I don't want them to be awkward in the meeting room, or I don't want them to come up with stuff that makes me feel insecure, or I don't want them to appear better than me, or whatever it happens to be. So even the development that gets brought within this sort of unconscious expectations of a certain conformity. And leaders who are able to become a learner with their people, that's where the magic really happens.
Hi, welcome to Evolve, a new era of leadership. I am your host, Carolyn Swora. Today on our show, I'm really excited to be talking to our guest, Ginny Baillie. Ginny is from the UK and is the founder of a leadership development company called Drum. We're going to talk about leadership development over the years, and we are going to learn about this really unique approach to leadership development that Gina has been doing since 2017. So if you are a leader who is interested in growing and learning and developing, you are going to enjoy this episode. I'm really excited. Let's dive in. Hello, Evolve listeners. We're back with another episode. I'm your host, Carolyn Swora, and today I'm so excited to be talking to our wonderful guest, Ginny Baillie. She's from the UK and sporting an amazing t-shirt that I'm in love with already. I'm envious. Ginny, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm being envious of my t-shirt. Always love a bit of
Yes, it's a Wham shirt, everybody, if you can't see it. So we're already starting off on a fun foot. But Ginny, you were boldly referenced with a previous guest that I had, Blair Palmer, Punks and Suits, and I just loved her vibe. And when she said you had a big influence on her, I thought, well, I'd really like to have this conversation with Ginny. I know you have just a whole lot of experience in coaching, in leadership programs, and facilitating those. You have a company called Drum. And I know in 2017, you took a really big turn with your company. I think that's where I'd like to start our conversation. What did you do in 2017? And tell us why you did it with your leadership company.
So I had been running, designing, developing, delivering leadership development programs. And I'm a really good facilitator, and I have really good ideas, and I have really great experience. And they weren't working. And it wasn't just me. I could just see it across the industry. The promise did not seem to be delivered on. And I spoke to a few people, and they would fly executives in from all over the world. They would put them up in hotels. They would do a 2 or 3 day development program. They would have coaching bolted on and hundreds of thousands of pounds. And 6 months later, one particular source I spoke to where they'd done this, he could not point to a single change. And 6 months later, the materials are gathering dust somewhere. It's not really mentioned again. The organization doesn't really know how to hold the development or the changes that were done. The individuals who took part in the program, they might have tried a couple of the things that they came off the workshop feeling inspired by, but quickly getting knocked back by the system, or it didn't work so well. And then the everyday workload piles in.
Right.
And I felt I was part of that. And I didn't want to be part of that. So we stopped running traditional leadership development programs. Now, I just want to be completely clear. I think there are a lot of programs that are really, really good. So I want to be really clear about that. This is not a, oh my God, they're all terrible. It is be incredibly aware of what you're participating in and what it will take to get the change that as an organization you say you want.
Right.
And I've been in coaching in the UK pretty much since inception, since 1998. And I know that the people involved in this industry are good people, are committed people, are credentialed people who we really make an effort to understand what inspires change. But something has just gone wrong at some point. So in that instant, I mentioned the company that had spent all the money, the person who signed it off, they're not going to go, I don't think this has worked. That brand I signed off, sorry, they're not going to say that. The coach isn't going to say it. They've got to put food on the table, and they'll be able to point to a happy sheet or to something that's worked well, and they'll have done some good work. And even if they can point to something even much more rigorous, they're not with the clients in the organization. They can't see what's actually happening. And then the person who participates in the program is not going to say it didn't work, because they're going to look like they're not a team player, or they're not trying, or they didn't step up enough. So in 2017, we stopped running leadership development programs and started to look at how to create spaces for people to choose to be involved with them, to choose to be connected, and to really access the resourcefulness of each other, rather than having to subscribe to a model or a structure or a particular prescribed approach, this 5 steps, that 3 steps, this 10-point model. And we stepped right out of that. And sometimes when I'm doing the work, I look at my skimpy facilitation notes and I feel really insecure. I want that 9 o'clock tea and coffee, 9:10 intros, 9:20, but we don't have that. And I think what I can point to is that, I mean, I can almost feel sort of a tiny bit emotional when I say this, but I worked with wonderful people pre-2017. I mean, really wonderful people. But I'm not really connected with them anymore. Every single person who's been through our drum doors since 2017, I could ring up and have a chat with, or I feel we have this weird relationship with. I'm not the facilitator at the front of the room. And you mentioned wonderful Blair, Punks in Suits. She and I have done a lot of facilitation together, and we spend a lot of time talking about how do we get away from being the thing people resist at the front of the room. So I'm free to have these really fruitful, delightful relationships with people that have endured for years, actually. So what's that, 4 years, 7 years? So I think that speaks to the difference in the approach and the environment that is created between all of us.
Totally. I mean, there's so many places we could go with this. You know, this was obviously pre-pandemic, pre-2020, which, you know, I think you were really onto something back then in 2017. And kudos to you for stepping into that. And what you're doing, in essence, is you are trying to change or impact a big system that was built to create efficiency and productivity, and less built around emergent connection and learning and tapping into the resources in the room. Would you agree?
Yes. I have enormous compassion. There is no judgment in what I'm going to say next. But when leaders say they want their teams to step up, they have no idea what that actually means. And often what they unconsciously mean, in my experience, is I'd like them to step up in the way that I want them to step up, and say the things I want them to say, and say the things that are going to make me feel good. They tend not to mean I don't want them to be awkward in the meeting room, or I don't want them to come up with stuff that makes me feel insecure, or I don't want them to appear better than me, or whatever it happens to be. So even the development that gets brought within this sort of unconscious expectations of a certain conformity, and leaders who are able to become a learner with their people, that's where the magic really happens. That's the piece where the leader becomes the learner with their people, where the hierarchy gets collapsed. That's when you see things happening. And in a traditional leadership development program where there isn't any other space for that's very difficult.
Right. I'm with you. You know, I started my business in 2016 after 17 years in, you know, a big machine, wonderful people, wonderful learning. And so I want to echo what you were saying. I'm not saying that all those things are bad. What I am interested is in having more conversations with people like you to help us evolve how we're learning, how we're growing, how we're leading. And I don't think that we create enough spaces like it sounds like you create in Drum, that I'm learning to create in my own work, that I position as being trauma informed or somatic, like based in somatics in our body. I think this is really where we need to bring more work so that it can balance out, you know, some of these other more intellectual programs. I'm curious what it was like for you in 2018 or 18 and 19. Like, how did that transition go for you? How did you find clients that were able to meet you where you were at and wanted to go?
As with much of the way I work, there are things that happen in the moment which help me crystallize what I was thinking. So I was asked by a global organization to come and do some leadership development. And when you're an independent consultant, that's a kind of manna from heaven moment. And I said, do you know what? No, that's not my bag. And as the words came out of my mouth, there was another part of me going, shut up, just say yes. But it was clearly the moment was there and the words were coming out. And he was like, oh, okay, well, we might have something. And I didn't think anything more of it. And then a month later, he called me back. And that was, I'd already done a lot of the thinking. And actually, I'd already been running drum-like stuff beforehand. But the crystallization was in the moment where I turned down what was really an enormous piece of work.
Right.
Something else. But they let me come and play in their company.
Why did he call you back?
Because he wanted me to come and look at the meeting culture in their organization. He wanted me to come and see what was going on and give him some thoughts and some ideas. It was almost like a off the record type of piece of work, because the thing you're talking about this, and you said less intellectual work. Before, I was reading something the other day. It's a program, and I'm just going to read out a couple of the pieces from it. It's an agile leadership program. It says transform your mindset and capabilities of your organization. And then it says all the things it's going to teach you to do. You're going to empower self-directed teams. You're going to apply agile approach to leading teams to organization. You're going to understand the impact of customer-centric business design. You're going to develop leadership skills, and the list goes on. That's over 3 days. Did you get that whole list?
Yeah.
An organization at this stage would rather buy that program than a piece of paper from Drum that says, we'll help your leaders think well together.
Yep.
They want that list, even though it is completely unsustainable, completely unattainable. There is zero chance people will be able to do all that at the end of 3 days. I mean, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I do know I've been coaching for 26 years. So there is zero chance that's going to happen. However, that program gets sold out. And so people buy the dream rather than let's explore what we've got. And that is a shift that organizations are finding really difficult to make. We've come a long way from leaders not wanting to ask people how they're feeling because they're terrified that they might burst into tears or something. We've come a long way from that. But in terms of creating space inside organizations for people just to put down their load of leadership and go, oh, and to be able to say what it's really like. Sometimes when we're working in spaces, the hairs stand up on the back of my arms. In fact, they're doing it when I talk about it. When people express to each other what's really going on. And there's two myths. One is that people will only talk openly to their coaches and they're not comfortable talking to anyone else. And that if they talk to anyone else inside their organization, they will be judged. Well, that's completely untrue. And in fact, it deepens the quality of relationships. But I don't want to promise this stuff. I want to say, hold the space, a skilled space. And there's no point just hanging out together and having a cup of tea. It's got to be skilled space. But actually, so when you said, your question was something about, making the transitions in organizations. I had people who took what for them was a real risk, where they were happy to see how it unfolded. But in terms of traditional purchase order, procurement departments, they want to see that list I just read you. So unless I concoct some cockamamie list of shit promises on it, it continues to be quite a big ask.
So clearly, you said you've been doing this work since, 1998 or 99. So you clearly had a client list of people that trusted you and said, yep, you know what, come on in. We want to try this out. One of the statements that you said around holding space and being skilled at it, I think that's a term and a skill set that will continue to be valued as more people like you and I and other great facilitators who are demonstrating that ability to hold space, to do it skillfully, and to allow things to emerge. And so what have you done since 2017 to appease the list and the sort of requirements of the systems, but also creating a bit of opportunity to allow this emergent space holding environment to unfold?
Well, the system is a multi-headed beast. So I wouldn't tell you that I've made massive headway in that. There are pockets. I would not hire a leader now unless they either could already do it or felt it was a priority to learn how to hold space. I'm very
Wow.
aware that hold space, it sounds like a bit jargonistic, and I haven't really come up
Yeah.
with anything better. But I really couldn't give a toss about somebody. You said you came from Big Pharma. I mean, I've had quite a lot of Big Pharma clients. I've seen their CVs. They're really impressive.
Yes, they
Yeah.
are.
So, yeah, great. You've got all that. Well done. Great.
Yep.
What is your capacity to hold space, to check your ego at the door? How can you
Yes.
really bring all the voices in the room without going, David, what do you think? Just because poor David hasn't spoken for 10 minutes and now he's like, oh shit, oh God. Where you get that genuine participation and collaboration. What is your skill at doing that? Where is your heart in that? What is your mindset? That's all I would interview for. Or let's say that's what I would interview for as a priority. And I
Right.
would say that the percentage of people who are able to do that is pretty small. And hopefully the percentage of people who want to learn to do that is much higher. So in the drum process, everything we do has to be replicable by the people who participate. We cannot do any cool master certified coach shit that they can't replicate.
Right.
So
Right.
this means that we're not trying to turn people into sort of the archdeacons of holding space or anything like that. We are role modeling everything we do. Stuff leaks virally into the way they work. We didn't know that was going
Right.
to happen, but that's really important. And sometimes when coaches are leading drums for the first time, they want to send out emails to the group going, here's what I noticed in the dynamics that you might be interested to look at. Or here's what I saw arise. And don't do that. Just don't do
Yeah.
that. Because we're not coaching them. We're modeling holding space and we're moving our chair closer and closer to the door. So by session 6, we are gone. Because the other thing that has happened in the development industry is we've become a sort of collusive beast, a codependent beast. And when
Yes.
I went to coach school, they told us to coach ourselves out of a job as quickly as possible. And that was a sign of success. But suddenly you're with companies are needing external consultants, external models, external this, external that for years and years, or their departments, rather than focusing on how can we grow from within? How can we have this culture of self-sustainability, even if we're a traditional organization? But they don't do
Mm.
that. And that's a really important part of what we do.
Well, I mean, codependency is so prevalent in so many types of relationships that we have in and out of work. So that's not surprising. And I'm with you. The shorter time I can spend with a client, the better. And we have to understand and check our own egos. Because to your point, saying no to a big client or letting a client go, helping them realize that sort of potential codependent relationship they have just feels so against what so many other people do. So I just want to recognize that, it's hard to go against that. I had a real moment, Ginny, when you were talking about how you would interview for a leader today, and that this notion of holding space is a really important skill set. I was told, especially near the end of my career in Big Pharma, and I quote, Carolyn, we don't really understand what it is that you are so good at. There's something about it that is just, we don't understand. It's really good. You're fabulous with people, but we don't want you to do that anymore. We need you to be more strategic. And you have just put words around it. I know what the magic was. I could hold space for people. And I didn't understand that word then. I am understanding it more and more now. And like you, sometimes I think, oh, it's a little woo woo. But that's really what we need to learn to do as leaders is how do we hold space? Because I'm sure you've heard lots of leaders say, I know I don't have all the answers. Great, we can say that up here. Holding space to me is an embodied practice of allowing other bodies, other hearts, and other minds into an energy field that we can truly co-create. And so I just want to thank you for that. And how do we get this skill set of holding space? How do we help more leaders, more organizations really value that? From my perspective here in North America, I think that door is opening. The receptivity is definitely opening. So can you tell us more about how more leaders can embrace it and maybe get into like, what is drum? Tell us a little bit more about your approach.
So that's the other thing is that wonderful books, wonderful ideas, wonderful approaches. You and I going, yeah, I learned to hold space, and that's what I would interview for. I mean, how the heck is a leader supposed to do that? Sometimes when I look at what leaders are supposed to do, I think, well, they should be wearing their underpants on the outside because they need to be superhuman to be able to do it. So the good enough thing, I think, is really important. So a bridge between academia or a bridge between the ideas and their everyday life, I think is really important. That's when I say, when we're talking inside drum, about not doing anything too fancy, that I, who have been coaching for 26 years, find comes really easily to me. I take back the power from the group when I start sort of, being amazingly coach-like. It's got to remain very grounded in people's everyday. So for me, and this is the way I like to learn, so I suppose this is how I've devised it, but drum is a highly visceral experience. So one of the things that people do is they will have a colleague inside a knot. So you've got 6 colleagues, similar seniority from across the same organization or different, but let's just take this one the same. They have no reporting lines and no competition between them. And what they will do is they will learn what genuine support and resourcefulness is through a kind of coach approach in the group. We will do reflection work. They will learn how to have generative conversations with each other. So it's the way in which they work together. They decide what they talk about. They discover really quickly that when a colleague talks about a problem, their desire to fix and solve that is overwhelming. And they discover really quickly quite how useless that is. And they don't discover it because I tell them. They see what doesn't work and what works. And so very quickly they understand. Now, I don't do anything fancy, but I'm really rigorous about a hold the space. Rigor or strictness is really unsexy these days, but holding the frame is really important because they have to be able to do it. It's a little bit like teaching somebody to drive. They've got to have the basics. After they pass the test, they can go off and do what the heck they like. But there are some basics they would not jettison. So if people are a bit soft around the coaching, or they're a bit too nice, or they pull back, I will stop the process in the group and go, okay, what are we thinking and what's going on here? Or I'll say to somebody, that is a great solution, but leave it till the end. That's when we're going to be coming up with that. So people start to see what's going on for somebody in an organization. The conversations are so real. And I know the answer to this, and this is probably my ego, but occasionally when they've just had this amazing open conversation with each other, which has really gone places they weren't expected, I then say something like, where else in the organization are you having conversations like this? And I know the answer is nowhere, but I just have to simply hammer it home. So learning to hold space, I think, is something you almost have to experience before you can learn to do it. I think that's how you learn, is having somebody hold space for you, and you experience how trusting it feels, how safe it feels. Safe without being kind of cotton woolly safe. You still have to take responsibility for what you bring to the space. And that's really important. So it's not a sort of cushion people up with a duvet sort of safety, but it is creating a space where people are able to decide and think what they want to bring. And it's because of their experience. And you talked about earlier, everything can be so cerebral from the head up. And I really relate to that. I've been like that for a long part of my life, and getting into the body and getting into the vibration. That's what happens. We don't do body exercises or meditation exercises or anything like that, but that is, I think, what happens.
How did you call it drum?
We had a working name of pod, but of course that was becoming ubiquitous. Everything was a pod. And I said to a colleague of mine, we've got to change the name. And it was a Friday afternoon, and we were bouncing around ideas, and drum came up really naturally because it's a vessel that exists in every single culture. And it's a holding space. So you can have it from an oil drum to a vase to a glass. It's a holding space. And this idea of a vessel, of being a holding space for people to come and think together, and not to have what they think about controlled. Whenever I do a talk with a group now, I won't do keynote speaking. I present ideas. I'm doing one tomorrow. I present ideas, and then everybody in the session, they get to talk about what thinking is being provoked by those ideas. We don't say, so how would you use these ideas in your organization? because it's highly directive. And actually,
Yeah.
maybe they even hated the ideas, but they will have been provoked in some way.
Right.
So it's actually helping people think well together within the business structure. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Oh, no, you did. It's so brilliant. The name behind it, the energy, the learning. It's such an embodied way of being in growth.
also it's what we do as kids. And latterly, somebody pointed out to me that the drum is the instrument at the back of the band, and it often sets the beat and it often holds the whole thing together. So,
It's
and
so
it's the
true.
Charlie Watts to the Mick Jagger. And I think I used to be Mick Jagger in my work.
Yeah.
I remember some terrible crystallizing moment where somebody said, I wonder what it's like to be facilitated by you. And my instant thought was, oh my God, it's a bit of a nightmare for 2/3 of the room. There'll be a third of the room that love me
Yeah.
and fabulous.
Yep.
For the other 2/3, because I'm using my energy, my charisma, my seduction,
Right.
all of those things. And that was not in service of the work I was doing. So the band, the drummer at the back, the and then it's off
Yep.
and it holds it all together. But it's a vessel. Drum is a vessel, and that's why it's called drum.
So, where do you see the next 10 years of leadership heading?
Okay, well, this is a massive question.
It is.
Where I see it going and where I want it to go probably are two different things.
Let's hear both. Where do you want it to go?
Where I want it to go is I want the hierarchical, the kind of false god, the metaphorical, they've got the parking space right at the front because they're the most important person in the company. A girlfriend of mine's just been on a book tour to Japan, and she said when the Japanese are talking to each other, they don't say, I think blah, 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 and like take that thought as my thought, because I'm having the thought, I accept that I'm having the thought because we're in conversation, that it is
Mm.
partly because of you as well that I am having this thought, or it is, between the two of us has created that thought in my head. So whilst we have the chief executive as the richest and most important person at the top, and the junior person in the call center is kind of at the bottom, while we have this sort of stacked hierarchy, it's very hard for the person at the top to really be able to hear the ideas of the junior person. It's really hard for the junior person to speak up. I can't bear that expression, speak up more, step up more. Well, that's really hard in our systems.
Yeah.
So where I want it to go is, well, I want universal basic income so we don't actually need to work. We want to work. So that's one of the things. But where there can be a leader's doing a job, the junior person's doing a job, the commercial director's doing a job. Everyone knows they're doing a job, and nobody's job is better or worse than anybody else's. That's where I'd like to see it.
So, if that is utopia, and I'm right there with you, so we'll both hold those beautiful visions, because if we're going to go somewhere, we need to know what it could look like. Where do you think we're going to head? What's going to get in our way?
So I don't know whether you're familiar with the ideas of open systems and closed systems.
Yeah, but why don't you just share a little bit for the rest of the
Okay,
group?
so I'm going to mangle it, but this is where I go with this around group dynamics. Closed system doesn't let in or out ideas, stimulus, people, freshness. It's kind of locked in. And an open
Yep.
system, ideas will come into that system. The system will think about them. They'll do something with them, and something will come out the other side. So there's a flow.
Right.
As an independent small business, I feel like organizations are more closed now as a result of the pandemic. To talk to people, you used to be able to call head office, and there was much more flow of ideas, and everything feels closed. The levels of fear feel really high. So being able to have conversations, being able to discuss ideas has really closed down systems. And I think this is really bad news for leaders. And I've had more leaders burst into tears in Zoom sessions in the last 3 years than I have in the whole of my career. For some, it's a badge of honor, but for most people, they're just wrapped in this sort of torture instrument of work. It's the rise of addiction. I see that as well. People come off, particularly if they live alone, they come off calls at 10 o'clock at night, having been on since 7, and they're absolutely shattered. So it's a bag of potato chips and a bottle of wine. They're not going to cook for themselves. And suddenly they're in this cycle. Eating really badly, work addiction, this globalization. So I think it's really important to let in those of us who are at the edge of systems, purposefully at the edge of systems, to say, come and share your ideas. What's
Right.
going on? These companies don't have forums or places where they say, can we just think about this and think and what's going on, because it doesn't have the 5-point plan or whatever it happens to be. So I feel almost with the people who have we're up on the balcony looking down. Now, I know that, it's hard work on the dance floor sometimes, and then we're not in the cut and thrust, but it's precisely because we're not in the cut and thrust that we have something to offer.
Exactly.
And those receptors, I feel, are being closed down in a way that I didn't experience before. And that's something I think has to be watched. When you said to me, what's the future of leadership? I was at a talk from a Palestinian refugee camp guy on Thursday night. There's going to something about race next week. There's the stuff going on in the American presidential elections. The ether is frightening.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising that our organizational systems are reflecting that.
Right.
So I think the trick for leadership and for organizations is for organizations to really support leaders, to feel safer, to take these perceived risks in holding space, in having thinking spaces. The drum sessions are 3 hours long. I have hilarious testimonials where people go, oh my God, when I saw 3 hours in my diary, I freaked out.
Yep.
Well, I'm not going to be able to look at my emails for 3 hours. I'm not going to. And then they come in and they say things like, well, that feels like I just did a 3-hour yoga session, which would be ghastly for me, but apparently they like it. So, but that's that nurturing thing. It's not about having ping pong tables and bean bags, everything. It's deeper than that. We have to be let in.
And so, the drum, you don't call them drum circles. I want to make sure I'm saying, or do you call them drum circles or drums?
I don't actually, but I don't mind people. I just call them drums.
Yeah. So these drums give the space. We learn how to hold space. And what I'm hearing you say is the more we can have drums or spaces like that, the more the system will open itself back up. We'll have more of an open loop system as opposed to this closed loop system, because the fear, the scarcity, everything is causing us to constrict and be in fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Ginny, we could talk for a lot longer, but I'm recognizing where I would probably want to take things. It would be like another hour and a half or two. So maybe we'll have you on another episode at some point in time. I'd like to just ask you one sort of closing question. How could somebody listening right now who is inspired by what you're sharing and this concept of holding space, what are 3 things that they could reflect on or start to think about and perhaps even do that can get them one step closer to that element of creating space with their colleagues?
Okay, 3 things. So they could learn some coaching skills. What I always say to people is become an acquirer of questions. So questions are for coaches, there are sort of my precious. There are,
Right.
I hear a good question, I write it down and I love it. The only materials we have in drum is 1 page of questions. So if you want to learn to hold space in the moments where you feel you want to state something or say something, ask a question that opens somebody else up. How did you get to that way of thinking? Oh, that's interesting. Tell me what's pushed that thought forward. Or how might we do that? I'm thinking in 20 years' time, or whenever, we won't be calling it a coach approach, we'll be calling it a human approach. But yes, good questions. Number 2, work on your stuff. Yeah, you talk about trauma. Take responsibility, because my trauma meets your trauma, and then we have a party, and we're not really talking about the things we need to talk about. So,
Yes.
as a leader, just say, "Yeah, I'm really going to be really committed." And it isn't necessarily a coach; it might be a therapist, or it might be a circle you need to get in outside of work. I've got a client, and every year, twice a year, he joins a men's walking circle up in the Peak District, and he finds that really nurtures him. And the third thing I do is I would really connect with other leaders and have the conversations I want to have with them. You don't even need to know them very well. Just somebody you met sometime, you had a good vibe with, or you'd love to get to know. But if you rang up and went, this may sound a bit weird, but I'd really love to spend some more time with you and share ideas around leadership, I'd be amazed if they went, what? No, on your bike. We love to be asked. And so see people. So gather some questions. If anyone wants to email me, I can send them this 1 page thing I talked about. Start thinking, gosh, I have, maybe I need to do some work for myself with circular therapy, a nurturing space. And then whatever I said the third one was, which I've suddenly forgotten.
Well, the third one was to reach out to somebody outside of your own.
Yeah, don't hang out on your own with your 3 a.m. thoughts.
Yeah.
And when people say, oh, how do you get people to open up and drum? I don't. I ask one question. I say, what drew you to accept the invitation to this drum? And people, out it comes. We want to connect. We want to be together. So that's really important. Grow your gang.
Wow. Ginny, thank you so much for coming on the show. So grateful. Where could our listeners and viewers find you?
You go to leaderdrums.com. It's all there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And we'll make sure that we include that in the link. Now, before we close off, I always ask the guests 3 questions that are part of my Evolve approach to leadership. And they really sort of fall into everything that we've talked about today. Are you game for hearing those 3 questions and playing along?
Yes.
The first one's about self-awareness. As you said, that was a sort of second suggestion that you gave the audience. I'm with you. I think self-awareness is a journey, not a destination. Although I used to think it was a destination and learned pretty quickly. There's a lot more to that path. So is there a story or an anecdote that really took your awareness about yourself from maybe here to like here?
Yeah. So I did some development work on psychodynamic and systemic approaches to organizations. And I thought I was just going to learn some stuff about systems. And I discovered how I showed up in groups. So when I went to a group, I thought it was really important to get to know people, have a bit of a time. Why are you here and what's going on? And when they didn't do that, I complained to the course participant, because I said, it's really, we're not getting to know each other. And he was like, well, Ginny, that's your need. Everyone else's need. And I was like, what? Well, surely. And what I discovered is that when I show up in groups, I really imprint how I think the group should be, how I think they should show up. And as we went through the process, in fact, it was time and time again, I kept being shown by the rest of the group, we don't want the way you want the group to run. And I really discovered that people do what they want rather than what you think they want to do. And I'd have times where I would feel rejected, I would feel traumatized, and there would be really significantly deep emotions, and I would blame the group for it. And what I didn't know is that I was pushing my expectations and my trauma onto the group. I had to take a much greater responsibility for how I showed up in the space. And once I was able to do that, it completely changed my experience of being in groups. So, I mean, it doesn't really hold together as a one-off, but I think that it's me just thinking, well, isn't that the way people like to behave? And then being challenged on that, and then being challenged repeatedly over several months and years to reflect on that was quite something. It was real standard, even though I hated it and I complained about it.
Growth never usually feels good inside at the beginning anyway. Yeah. And I'm going to guess that the people in your groups had a very different experience too, probably opened up more, as you were saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, but it was this, we did loads around projection and transference, and, it was kind of, but if I hadn't put myself forward to be in that space, back to my second point about doing the work, is don't do something because you think it's a good idea, do something because you're interested. I had no idea I was signing up for a visceral traumatic experience, which was going to come out good at the end.
Yeah. Well, that's how I found my way into trauma-informed leadership. I just followed a little thread of something that happened to me, and somebody said a word and I thought, oh, so yeah, excellent point. So second question is around our ability to self-regulate. And so often people will have rituals or cues that help them bring themselves back into a more regulated state where they don't feel as activated or in a fight or flight situation. Or maybe they're trying to bring themselves back into a place of calm. So curious if you could share with us, what is a ritual or something that you do to help you regulate?
Well, there's daily practice. And when I don't do it on the days, I notice I have a different type of day. So I have a daily practice I do in the morning. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm outside. I live in an area of what they call in the UK area of outstanding natural beauty. And I'm out there greeting the morning. And if it's warm enough, I'll journal outside and I'll meditate. So that's every morning. And when people say every morning, yeah, there are mornings where it doesn't happen. So absolutely. And
Yeah.
I have a different space. In terms of in the moment, I do two things or three things. One is I react really badly and sulk. So that's, so it doesn't go well. So I fake a smile. The other I do is I actually tell people what the reaction I'm having. I go, I just noticed what's happened and I share it. And then I say, so there must be something interesting that's going to come here. So I'll say, I notice I'm having a really negative reaction to the directions conversation's going. And to me, that probably means I need to pay more attention. So it kind of takes the sting out of it and I own it in the group. And I have found that to be really incredible. There was a meeting I was in once where this happened. I got triggered. I started sulking and I put this fake smile on my face. I thought, I've only got 8 more minutes. And I suddenly went, oh shit, this is a 2-hour meeting, not a 1-hour meeting. And I couldn't fake it for another hour. So I confessed. I said, I've just been really triggered. And we had the most amazing conversation. There's no way the conversation would have gone that way if I kind of held my sulk. So I do that. And the other thing I do is I think about what am I here to support happening. So yeah, I do breathing. I sometimes grip the chair. There are some bodily things I do, but I do refocus myself on what are we here to do? And how can I now serve in this moment rather than feeling pissed off about what's happened or being triggered. We get triggered all the time. It doesn't matter how brilliant we are.
Right.
It's what we do after the trigger that's important.
Right.
And I've got a lot better at that.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Just to give it space, right? So last question. Lots of pressure on you here. Just kidding, because you're in my favorite musical place of the world, which is the UK. So this question is around co-regulation. And I find music is just an incredible way to feel in connection with other people without having to speak to them necessarily. So what is a song or genre of music that helps you feel connected to something bigger than yourself?
I'm going to drop this now and you're going to want to talk to me in a whole nother podcast, but I've just completed a modern medicine woman practitioner training.
Oh, yes, I do want to talk to you more about that.
I thought so. There's the most beautiful song called The Way Knows. And I find myself when I'm walking around singing, I'm not a singer, I've got a reedy little voice. But because it's connected to this incredibly nurturing and extraordinary experience I had in this sacred feminine space with these incredibly powerful modern women. I mean, we had hysterics as well. I nearly set them alight with my sage burning with their flammable raincoat. But so that's really beautiful, that deeply ceremonial music I really love. And then really anything by Wham is obviously a really big deal. Blondie, The Pretenders, all of that I absolutely love.
What's your favorite Wham song or favorite George Michael? We'll extend it into George Michael or Wham.
Well, obviously I love Wham rap. Edge of Heaven, Last Christmas. Yeah, I mean, all of them. I tell you what it is, and if anyone hasn't seen it on Netflix, the Wham documentary, if I ever went on Desert Island Discs, I would choose such uncool songs because it's what it evokes, what you remember. It's so uncomplicated, it's so clean, it's so innocent, and it's kind of so cheesy. I love cheesy music. Yep. I listen to some cool stuff as well. My husband has a cool music collection, but it's really so yes, I think that, and I think the Way Knows is really beautiful and really lifts your heart. And I'll give you the title of the song so you can put it in the link.
Beautiful. Well, Ginny, thank you so much. Beyond Wham, I just, we started off on Wham, we're going to end on Wham. So that's wonderful in and of itself. But thank you so much just for your insights and all the work that you do. I really hope that our listeners are taking something away that will help them navigate through these chaotic waters that we all seem to be in these days. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
When I first started studying organizational culture, I learned of the work of Ed Schein. And he's called the grandfather of organizational culture. He passed away last year, maybe the year before. But his work really influenced how we view organizational culture and leadership. And I heard him speak one time, just a few years ago, and he said, there was one thing that we could do to change our organizations. It would be to change how we set up meetings and how we meet. he's like 90% of the problems could be solved if we learned how to meet better. And this conversation with Ginny today, I think really aligns with what Ed was saying a few years ago. When we look at meetings that we have in our workplaces, I think there's a space for some, not all, of these meetings to have a bit more space for space, if you know what I mean. Thank you so much for listening, for tuning into this podcast. Would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to the podcast. Feel free to share it with a friend as well. And if you want to see more about the work that I do, you can find me at carolynswora.com. We'll see you soon.